PCM Projects Lunchtime Livestream Series 4. Well, this is something that I thought Series 4 might appear a lot sooner than this. Series 3 took place April last year in 2020. So, welcome to Series 4. This is the Beginner's Call episode. This is going to be a series of 6 live streams taking place lunchtime, same time, UK time, 12:30 to 1 o'clock. Starting this week, I did want to start at the beginning of the month, but getting back into streaming and firing that up and planning it interferes sometimes with just doing it. So here is the just doing it. So this is the Beginner's Call. I'm hoping to get in touch with the guests that I have in mind for this series of 6. And also the play out guest, I believe Casey Wilson has already kind of agreed in a previous conversation. So I'll be getting in touch with Casey to see if we can get her back to do our play out songs. And also I will be inviting Tracy Briggs back to join me to talk about dyslexia and how our world is affected, governed, made brighter, dominated by how we deal and cope with dyslexia, specifically from the perspective of the entertainment industry. Tracy is an actor and I am a stage manager and producer, been digital over the year. So this is me just doing the first half hour to kind of get my ideas out. Also, I've been setting it back up. I've been taking a look at StreamYard, which this is being streamed from, and the locations where I want to stream to. So over the last year, I've spent a lot of time in Zoom. Zoom is not my preferred platform. I'm a reluctant advocate of Zoom purely for the accessibility that they afford, being closed captions, audio description, and the ability to pin for BSL interpretation. And that is something that going through this series of 6, I am going to be looking at how on a zero budget, because these are fun pieces which I'm not being paid to do, they're not sponsored. The people who are taking part are coming on as part of personal development, getting the hang of live streaming and being a guest. They're also platform curious. They might hopefully have great stories to tell, but no one is being paid. There's no promotion. So this is how can I get the platforms that I prefer working with to be accessible so that when I do go out to clients, I can use the set of tools that I am most comfortable with for both guests and cast and content and speakers, and also so that the audience experience is accommodated. And the audience should always come first. Just like the customer is always right, the audience should always be first. And this time I am going to Periscope. So if you are watching via Twitter, you're probably watching on Periscope, which isn't going to be lasting long. So we may have a farewell to Periscope stream at some point when that goes offline. I'm not quite sure how that's going to happen. Also going live to YouTube. So my YouTube channel, trying to build up a little bit of content there and a little bit of watch time. And also to a Facebook group, and that Facebook group is the PCM Adventurers. So the people who are in that Facebook group include one of the projects that I did very early on in the pandemic was some guest lecturing for Mount View Theatre School for their creative producers MA. And from that was developed the idea of a digital field trip. So all of the platforms that I really like to use have different purposes and they suit different needs. And the idea is to have some practitioners who are wanting to do this stuff come on a bit of a field trip. And we did that. And this studio was used as an anchor point for them to be in a Facebook page. So other people who are kind of interested in the crazy stuff that I get up to are members of that group. It's quite small. I've also been live streaming from the Oculus Quest. So VR, something I really want to explore for myself, but also understand how audiences can actually enter that environment, because that's the other thing that I'm very conscious of as an audience advocate and a creative producer. It's great that we can make this work, but how do we engage with the audience, and how do we engage in a way that is not about the platform, but it's about the content? And that entry point, that journey from ticket to seat, is really key. So my last week of normal was, and I actually did mark it. I mean, this isn't something I just made up. We ran the other way. Last March, we got to March, and it kind of started to feel a little bit, something's about to happen extraordinary, that is inevitable. There was an inevitability coming into March. I had bought a little mini projector, which was being sent through Amazon, and I knew that it was coming from China. And it took forever, the shipping. And when I was tracing the journey of that, it was obvious that it was just stuck in a dock somewhere, and it wasn't getting to the UK. And sort of that slowdown of commerce was obviously starting to happen. And then, of course, the Broadway closed, and the West End closed. And although I don't work in the West End, with the attention that I give to equity and the industrial contract negotiations, a lot of the industrial contractual stuff of the entertainment industry really takes place around three main organisations for the theatre and live performance, and that is Theatre UK and Theatre UK, and they negotiate the sub-rep contracts, so theatre contracts in places like the Nottingham Playhouse, some of the larger theatres in the country outside of London. And then you've got SALT, which is the Society of London Theatres, who negotiate the contracts for the West End primarily. And then there's the commercial contracts which exist. There's also the ITC, which is the Independent Theatre Council. And they're the contracts that I tend to base my best practice on. And as a member of equity, I'm not a member of the ITC, but there's a kind of a strange line the last year has kind of presented me in terms of being a performer and a creative, a production creative, and actually being a producer and producing and making work. And so the journey that on the 15th to the 21st of March, that's when everything closed down. And it's when I haven't really left. I mean, this is PCMHQ. PCMHQ can be wherever I happen to be with my streaming kit and spend reasonable lengths of time. There's, when out of COVID, I am dying to get back to Minor Oak, which is in the centre of Nottingham in Snetton Market, which is a co-working space run by Dee Miller. I love it. It is exactly what a co-working space should be. It's the best one I've ever encountered. And Dee is amazing, and she looks after us all. She's a great co-working mama. So I'd be delighted to get back there. But that was the last time I really had those conversations. And since then, oh boy, has 2020 was just a roller coaster. I mean, extending the audience program was something that came out of working with Audiences Europe from between 2014 and 2016. And in the middle of there was the live stream digital extension of the audience, awful name at that time, to combine a digital audience with a physical conference audience, and having a continuity studio that was embedded in the breakout area that we streamed from the main hall out to the internet, but also watching that as a studio, a continuity studio, like the sporting galleries that you get where they're looking over the sporting arenas and they're actually sat in kind of a lounge kind of thing doing the commentary. And that's the sort of thing that we'd have between sessions. So since then, I really love that format of being able to enable people who can't travel to the location. I mean, this particular one was in Reykjavik in Iceland, and it was for all of the Scandinavian nations. And the travel to there, A, it can be expensive, Also, a lot of the people that joined the live streams at that time, they would have come in person, but it conflicted time-wise with their either care responsibilities or their work commitments. You know, to go to a conference for 3 days, it's not a conference for 3 days. It's a conference that you have to A, mentally prepare for, B, be accommodated and travel. And that travel can often take a day in itself. And when you get the other end, you kind of want to make sure you're in a relaxed environment to actually take part in a 3-day conference. And then after that conference, you've got the travel home. So actually a 3-day conference can really turn into a week. And then being able to get straight back into your work life can be very disruptive. So there was this notion that extending the audience to be able to participate digitally was really key, and participate digitally, not in just a passive observation mode. And I had spent time watching live streams as well as running them. And the thing that would always be the most jarring is at the break times or after a session, they would just cut the camera. They would cut the camera and it would be back soon. And all of a sudden you were left back in your own space. And that for me is not a continued linear experience. So the whole point with working with Audiences Europe was, how can you curate that experience and take that group of people with you on a journey? And being the physical anchor in a space was really key. And knowing who had booked tickets so that you could look beforehand to see what devices they were on, which browser were they on, making sure that you had some sort of back channel and being able to chat. And we ended up with some independent speakers that couldn't speak at the event, joined the live stream, and then in the breakout times when people were having their coffee and stuff, we would actually interview the person who would have spoken but didn't have the time to travel to the audience that were in the digital. So you started to get a situation where actually you were getting content in the digital event that you just wouldn't get. And the social side of a physical event is great if that's the sort of thing you really like. And for some people, it can be so overwhelming that communicating digitally has been the preferred. So my first week of Not Normal kind of opened up a lot of doors for me. A lot of people who knew what I did, but often would ask, what is it that you do? I was asked a lot. And once the pandemic emerged, the question started to become, do you do? And that question really changed everything that I was able to present to people, because rather than spending time trying to explain and interpret the technology that I put together to enable audiences to happen, it became about solving their problems. And a lot of business consultants and business mentors that I've been talking to, it was always about what are the pain points, identify the pain points. And the problem that I always kind of came up with, which I felt really lame about it, was that what are your pain points? And when I would ask them, or I would think about the people who had already engaged me, it hadn't been about pain points. It was about the necessity of access. So by creating it, there wasn't any pain in the first place in terms of the bit that I was part of. But this lifting of concept, that people were really then be able to say, oh, do you do this? And do you do that? And can I do this? And that way, those can I's and do you was about their pain. And they didn't necessarily know what that problem was. They just knew that now they were in a situation where they couldn't do the physical stuff. Therefore, they had to do the digital stuff. So who can help them with that? And it hadn't become pain at that point because it was so new. So it was also probably round about that sort of time that Zoom was mentioned to me. And I spent about a week configuring Zoom accounts for people and just getting to know how it works. What does it do? How does it compare to the other platforms that I've been using? Zoom hadn't been something that I used simply because it was another app to download. And at the time, the biggest battle in 2019 was getting people to download another app. And Zoom, with the amount of hurdles to access, was not really something that was on my radar. I'd been using things like Skype and Google Meet. People would object to Google Meet because it was Google, and they would object to Skype because it was Microsoft. And it's like, I just want to hold a meeting where people can come together. So I discovered Whereby, and Whereby has been my go-to video calling platform. It had been for probably a couple of years. And Google Whereby is browser-based, one-click access, nothing to download, no sign up. It's just click and connect. And for that kind of ease of entry, it was amazing. So that was where I'd been holding some meetings, and several groups that I work with, I'd been able to allocate them different Whereby rooms, and I still see them popping up. They're still using them all the way through pandemic. It was just a room that could hold 8, 12 people, and they're still using them. So that was what I was using. But Zoom has quite a few entry points, and there's certain complexities with its setup, whether you're using the app to access or whether you're using the browser to access. And there's kind of a meeting in the middle that blurs in a way that users aren't aware of. So if you've got multiple users on your desktop and someone has signed in with the app, if you click a link in your calendar that opens Zoom, it will log you into the call and the person who the app was logged into. So hence people are having different names, or it's something that's tied to their email address. All sorts of logistical intrigues are going on around that kind of platform. So Whereby became my help desk platform. So some of the conferences that I ran for digital, so there was 3 that I did last year. The first one was with the Green Liberal Democrats, which was a 2-week Zoom conference session with breakouts and webinars, really a baptism of fire in terms of how I feel about this platform that is Zoom. And there was a lot of reluctance to it. There's a lot of things that made me go, I really don't ever want to use Zoom ever again. But it emerged as I looked at other stuff to replace Zoom and the functions that Zoom gave me, a really disturbing dilemma. So in 2020, as the Green Liberal Democrats, I did a conference through Zoom combination. I did Producers Pool. Chris Grady took the Producers Pool online, which was a group that met regularly in London, but I was never quite able to coordinate my trips down to London to get there. And I really wanted to try and introduce and extend the audience element. And Chris has moved Producers Pool onto Zoom during the pandemic, and how that then blends back to physical is going to be an interesting one for me, because I'm not going to be able to go down to London. But there are speakers that are based in London that will be speaking there, that if I can help him facilitate this extended audience, is going to be fantastic. So I also spent a few weeks at the beginning helping the LADA, Jennifer Tosvik, sort out how she was going to accommodate the digital world into a platform, and Zoom was the first one that came up. So everybody was like, Zoom, 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 Zoom. So I've become intimately familiar with Zoom, and reluctant user because it does have the accessibility. I also worked with Cromford Mill to do the Arkwright Society annual lecture. They did a series of conference talks for an audience for a day. I spent some time working with Not Now Collective on their online screened version of Pepper and Honey, which was an absolute delight. We had a supported Zoom iteration showing a film with closed captions. We had a access Zoom, which had the screened version of the audio described version, and then an unsupported auditorium, which had the majority of the audience in, which was watching a shared screen with them with their cameras hidden. But the thing that was delightful about it was done in 2 parts. So Act 1 was one Saturday and Act 2 was the second Saturday. So the longest interval in history, I believe, possibly. But they had a sensory tray that they encouraged the audience to produce and have in front of them. So it had things like fresh coffee and herbal tea, and the times when there was some cooking going on with some walnuts and some particular oils, and there was a particular liqueur that was related to the context of the Croatian story that was going on. And so it encouraged the audience to have that. And then after the final performance on Act 2, it was a group all came together, mics and cameras on, and we talked about, did you enjoy it? And they got the chance to sort of connect with each other. And also the performers and the people taking part in the project, for some of them, the project had come together over COVID. They'd never met in person. There's a lot of people who are collaborating right now who have never met in person. And I know when I first encountered that digital experience where you meet people through Twitter and through web streaming, and things like Seismic, where you were seeing people on video calls and there was this backwards and forwards of dialogue. The first time you meet them and you kind of greet them like a long lost friend, and there's a moment where you go, hold on a minute, we've never actually met. Oh my God. And we've got all that to come. And it's a really lovely feeling. It's a really nice feeling that sometimes you can go to a place and feel like you don't know anybody, but then you can go to some places where you know lots of people. You know their Twitter names, but you don't know their real names. And there's all of that to discover for people who were not quite as digital as those that did that. So access during the pandemic has been really key. And I've discovered that a lot of the platforms, so this is StreamYard, and during the pandemic, a company called Hopin, who they're what I call event wrappers. So the platform exists to facilitate your audience. They look after tickets, they look after the networking aspect. You go into one location and you have a schedule, and all the different rooms and breakout rooms and keynote lectures, they're all facilitated by that one wrapper platform. And then in those rooms, you can then choose whether you use their native studio to live stream in a webinar, or whether you're in a sort of a meeting hall type thing. Or whether you use StreamYard, or whether you use your OBS to RTMP into that platform. So you've got lots of flexibility for studio input, but you've got a very contained audience. Hopin bought StreamYard. That's a really interesting investment in terms of virtual events going forward. Other platforms that do a similar thing, there's Conf.co, which is one that I've looked at. And there's also Remo, which is a tables based. And there's lots of similar ones that do the similar kind of thing. But there's an entry level in terms of cost, which for arts and culture and also for experimentation is quite limiting. So in terms of being able to scale into a platform like that, you kind of take your audiences with you. But the thing that none of those do right now is closed captioning. And I've found closed captioning very useful to just follow along with a low volume audio sometimes. And in November, just right at the end of November, I think because I've been wearing headphones so much during the pandemic, my hearing changed. It's been very sensitive, and I've got a tinnitus that I'm coming to terms with at the moment. It's here at the moment, but I just can't, I have to limit my use of headphones. And being able to use closed captions for YouTube and being able to use closed captions also the interesting use of captions. I attended a session about accessibility, which showed a video that was in sign language only. And I thought, this is in a language that I can't read. And then it suddenly dawned on me, oh, maybe it's got closed captions. And it did. So the only way I could know what was going on in the conversation was because I was using the closed captions. And that ability to access something that I couldn't access before, and likewise giving them the opportunity to access other stuff by default, has just been absolutely essential, and I think needs to be championed and needs to be talked about all of the time. So I'm always asking, is there closed captions? Because they're really important to me. So Zoom, coming back to my reluctance for Zoom, I use Otter, which is a transcription service. And before the pandemic, it was on my phone, and I could run that app during a meeting in front of me, and it would record the meeting, it would transcribe it live. Really useful. Also, anyone who knew me before the pandemic would know that I also have a LiveScribe pen, which writes onto normal notebooks, but actually picks up the audio in the room, so that when I tap the writing, it will play back what was written in the room at the time. However, because I was using headphones all the time once we went into digital, this became unusable. So Otter became my go-to. And because Otter connects with Zoom, I was able to hold video calls in Zoom, have Otter running, which would initially give a transcription compromise for closed captions, but it would also record it and transcribe it. The development that Otter had gone through during the pandemic has now meant that the closed captioning works directly into Zoom. That journey has been a joy to watch, that someone is adapting in that way. There's also in Zoom the pinning of different people. And if you are having a BSL interpreter, British Sign Language, being able to allow the person in the audience to pin that next to them is invaluable. Audio description, a little more fuzzy, but I was introduced to a really curious way of using Zoom where audio description was kind of fudged in, and it used the translation feature. So in Zoom, you can have a translation channel. So if you're, always think of those big diplomatic parliaments where they've got the world leaders with headphones on and there's interpreters in the box interpreting. You can kind of do that sort of thing where you can have an English channel, a French channel. And what I've heard companies doing is using one of those channels to be able to introduce a translation. However, because it is specifically for language, when the mic is active for the translator, the audio of the Zoom is reduced so that the voice of the translator can be heard. So it becomes a mic battle of making sure that the announcement for the audio description is started and ended before the speaking begins again of the speaker. So bit of rehearsal to go on there, but there is a way of doing it. So access is key. And currently, anybody who says to me, why don't I use this? Or why don't I use this other? That's the reason. And until those platforms can do that, as I say, this is not sponsored. I am in no way connected to Zoom. And I'm not sure that a lot of it is Zoom's intention. But if any other platforms do it, those are the things that I want to know about platforms. And I have spoken to Crowdcast, because that was one of my other go-to platforms that I really liked before the pandemic, was Crowdcast. And sadly, although they have the audience bringing them up on stage, being able to have chats, being able to do Q&A, being able to do polling, there's no accessibility. And that's problematic with the kind of work that I'm trying to champion and the ethics that I'm trying to introduce into my working practice. So I'm coming to the end of this half an hour, and it is just gone half an hour. So this is going to be the Lunchtime Livestream Series 4. This was the beginner's call for me to kind of have this bit of a, yep, I'm back here. I will be trying to find ways of putting closed captions here. The solution I have at the moment, which I use with Crowdcast, is to use something like Google Meet, which has auto translation, auto captions, and have an access lounge running where anybody who wants closed captioning can be given access to that Google Meet that has a screen share of the presentation, and the audio coming through the screen share is translated. And I had that working for the General Secretary hustings for equity. I tried to do it today with this, and I really need to be across 2 machines to do that, because it was getting confused, and I was looking like Max Headroom on the camera because the cameras were getting confused on which connection it was having. But that is something that I will be wanting to do. So this will be, at the moment, I will have to run this through Subtitles, which is a subtitling platform that you can put a video through and it will generate the SRT file, and then I will have to upload that to YouTube. Or I may actually, now I've thought about it, I will download this, I will put it into iMovie. No, I will download this and use Handbrake to embed the captions. In fact, there's an even easier way. You might be able to see the cogs in my brain working. I am going to just put it into Subtitles, generate the captions, save the video out, and then upload it to YouTube. That will have closed captions baked into it. You can use you know what, I will do another, if accessibility is something that's that's interesting, I will probably talk about the different ones, but I don't want to have the next 6 episodes be me pouring my brain out on the different things. I want to be talking to Tracy about the dyslexia hurdles that she's come across during the pandemic, and how going forward there's lessons that can be learned, and how we can go back into the physical world with a confidence and a stand to say, you know what, actually this accessibility needs to be accommodated. And that conversation of, if people don't know about it, having the resources from digital that people can go and find out about it. So yeah, do subscribe and follow from wherever you're watching this. So if you're on YouTube, do subscribe. Most people of watch times on stuff aren't subscribed, but do subscribe, because why should you subscribe? The stuff that I subscribe to in YouTube, when I actually watch YouTube, they're the things that show up in my home. And there is a big battle amongst YouTubers of whether you should do the bell notification. Bell notification for my stuff, really not important, because it'll go to your email. Hopefully they will appear in your watched stuff, and also there's the whole YouTube algorithm, but please do subscribe. Also, the benefit of subscribing, if you're subscribing to a new YouTuber and they are looking to join the partner program, and start making revenue off YouTube, it may have changed, but the last recollection, my belief was you needed 1,000 subscribers, which isn't hard in itself, but you need 3,000 hours of watch time within the last year. Or it might be within the last month. I think it's within the last year. And it's that tracking that is really key. So watching stuff is really good regularly, but if you subscribe, you'll just help them contact their community, and they'll get a sense of, you know, who is their followers, especially for new YouTubers. So please subscribe on YouTube. It's also it's gone to Periscope. So if you've watched from Periscope, please do follow me on Twitter at PCM Creative. And it's also gone to the Facebook group, the PCM Adventurers. If you are interested in joining the PCM Adventurers group, message me on Facebook or message me on Twitter. Put something in the comments to say what your Twitter name is or how I might contact you to be able to do that. Of course, do find me, Caron-Jane Lyon, on LinkedIn if you want to connect with me there. But also you can email the production office at PCM Projects. And the great thing about StreamYard, which I'm using here, this is going to be my closing 5 minutes. I can very basically do things like the lower third. So the things that I've shown popping up at the bottom in this purple banner at the bottom, I've got very easy access to things like that. I can have 10 guests waiting in a waiting room to bring in different guests. I can change the branding of this. But there's also private chat for the guests who are waiting to come in, so they can talk to each other and they can talk to me. But also I can bring in comments from the people who are working on different streams. And delighted to say that I don't have to pretend or not being able to show you. But at a previous session I was at this morning, which was Tuttle, Mike Beardmore was present, and he helped me do a little bit of push and play testing. And he was able to he made it to see some of the stuff. And thank you so much, Mike, for that help. But that's also an example there of how you can interact with your audience. If you need to do more interaction with your YouTube audience, it's another thing that I can possibly talk about. I've got to work out which things are most useful, and that's really where you guys all come in. I've just said the word that I really hate other YouTubers say, and I'm not telling you what it is, but I will be trying not to say that. So the banner's the production office. If there's anything you would like to cover, if you would like to be a guest, if you would like to come and be on the webcast, let me know. There's going to be a series of 6. Those 6 might go into series 5 of 6. I always try and keep them containable so that I'm not setting myself up to fail and dwindling away at the end. But on that, I'm going to leave you with this that isn't actually in fact, I can live create a banner, and that is that since the end of December 2020, I have been daily blogging. And the link for that is pcmcreative.typepad.com. And by adding the banner and adding it in straight away, I can give you that. They're very small, so they're not going to take long to read. And it's just a challenge for me. 2020 was a new beginning, and it's going to be a new beginning for a lot of people. 2021, I always have a word at the beginning, not a resolution, but a word that will guide me through. I can't remember what 2020's was. I had legacy a few years ago when I was thinking about how do we document and stay present with the past. This year is mindfulness, and part of that mindfulness was finding out what it is, putting it into practice, and seeing if I can sustain a sense of mindfulness and what that means to me. So doing these daily blogs was one of the things that I wanted to do as a consistency. And I'm doing that. I'm doing them every day, and they're very small. I think I've missed 2 days, but I'm not punishing myself for missing one. And I often end up finding myself adding a second one to make up for it. So do check out my blog and do follow that. And I will see you next Friday at 12:30. So do comment wherever you have watched this. Email again. Do let me know by email. Who are my audience? I spend a lot of time helping people discover their own audiences, and I know that I don't spend enough time on my own. So please let me know who you are. And live streaming has to come to an end. How do we do it? Is there an exit? That's always the thing, which is why it's so lovely to have Casey playing out at the end, because then when the music finishes of you seeing her, I can end it. So there's always that, how do we end it? So I am going to say, thank you very much. Enjoy your weekend, and I will see you again in episode 1